Welcome, everyone. I'm Val Hawkins, chair of Agenda Alexandria. In our 24th season, Agenda Alexandria is our community's premier organization that explores the issues that our city faces without taking sides. In fact, our motto is taking a look without taking sides. Today, we have a very special, timely, and relevant program of high interest to our community. Alexandria's city budget and services challenges under COVID. You should know that participants on this panel today do not represent nor constitute an institutional position, nor endorsement from the board of Agenda Alexandria. We strive on not taking sides on the issues and offer this program as part of our continuing mission to include contrasting sides, yet focused on the matters affecting our City of Alexandria. Special thanks to Simpson Development, Homes of Alexandria, the Zebra newspaper, and our sustaining contributors, Eileen Ahern, Ricardo Alfaro, Linda and Steve App, Russell Bailey, David Baker, Janet Barnett, Christopher and Brooke Curran, Oscar and Toby Fitzgerald, Jenny Franco, Jay Hoffman, Hoffheimer Security and Telephone Systems, Lee Carosi Dunn, Liz Legg, Kit Kreider, Anna Leiter, Pat Miller, David Speck, and Julianne and Shad Thomas. We would like to thank our board members who have worked to organize and execute our program today. Frank Fannon, our moderator today, Rod Cuckrow, Linda App, and special thanks to Ricardo Alfaro, our vice chair and producer, who's done an incredible job since the pandemic producing these programs and delivering them to our public. And finally, we're most appreciative of our great panelists who've graciously given their time and thought to address this important subject. Frank will introduce them after this message.
Good afternoon, Alexandria, and welcome to Agenda Alexandria for our February program. We're going to be focusing today on the city's budget and the challenges we're facing here in Alexandria with the COVID pandemic that's been taking place. As many of you know, Alexandria runs on an annual budget. The city manager has recently proposed the budget that will be discussed by the city council and voted on in May. Our city budget has been proposed for $767 million this year. And with us today, we have three citizens that have tremendous knowledge of the budget, have been involved with our community for years, and they're going to give you a good input on the way they think this budget is going to play out this year and how it is compared to years in the past. The first I'm going to introduce all three, and then we'll have some opening comments and questions from them. Our first panelist is Janet Fleetwood. She's a longtime resident of the area. She's been involved with budgets for over 30 years, working for the Defense Department and other organizations with the federal government. She's been appointed by the City Council to serve on the BFAC Committee. For those of you who don't know what BFAC is, it stands for the Budget and Fiscal Affairs Committee, and they give input to the City Council as they prepare for the budget. Our second panelist today is well known to many in Alexandria, Rob Krupika, who I served with on the City Council. Civic service goes back over 20 years in Alexandria. Rob started out as the president of the Delray Civic Association. He was elected to the City Council in 2003 and also served in our state legislature for a few years. After Rob left public service, he became an entrepreneur and has opened some restaurants and some of his own businesses. And we'll hear from Rob today on his thoughts of being an elected official and also being a private business owner here in the community. Our third panelist is Bill Rosello. Bill is a 32-year resident of the area in Alexandria. He's on the board of the Seminary Hill Association. He's also involved with the Federation of Civic Associations. Bill has also served as a consultant for years to local governments dealing with budget issues. So I want to thank all three of you for being here today, and we look forward to a lively discussion. Janet, let's start out with you if we could. Janet, if you could give us a little background of what BFAC is, what role it plays, so the citizens understand a little bit about how our city's budget is prepared.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me as well. So BFAC is a volunteer group associated with the city. There are 13 members. There are 7 who are designated by the city council members. I am the mayor's rep on BFAC. There's also one for the school board. There's 4 at-large members, and then there's one for the Chamber of Commerce. Basically, we provide overall recommendations on budget guidance during the fall before the city actually does their budget. We also attend the fall budget retreat. Things that we've recommended in the past is looking for sources of revenue. For example, the difference between residential and commercial property taxes. You look at user fees, economic development, particularly with Amazon coming in the area. And then we also, once the budget comes out, we provide a memo to the city on both recommendations for long-term and also process and procedure recommendations as well. So some of the things that we've done in the past is we've recommended that they do a long-term revenue plan review to look at the revenue base. Also ways to have more transparency for citizens as far as our long-term fiscal challenges are. Some of the process things we've looked at is providing more time to look at the capital improvement program. Also the fact that they use priority-based budgeting, which we think is a very good thing. We also address some issues that may come up from the city. So for instance, they've asked us to take a look at the pandemic, the city's response to the pandemic. So we've just done that recently. They also wanted us to take a look at the unassigned, the uncommitted targets. They also had us take a look at project management, the quarterly report that the council sees, to see if there are ways that they might improve that process. And then they also had us take a look at affordable housing. Those are just a few things that we do.
Great. All right. Thank you, Janet. And Rob, you've been involved with city budgets for 15 years with your 10 years on the city council and also working in the state legislature. If you could just give us a little overall global view of how you believe the city of Alexandria performs in presenting their budget every year, and some of the things when you were a city councilman and also as a state legislature that you would encourage the city staff, what they could do to help prepare a successful budget for the city council to vote on and approve and discuss.
Sure. Thank you, Frank, for having me.
Sure.
And
Sure,
this is a great event. It's an important topic. I'm reminded of the budget we had to go through when the Great Recession happened after the housing market collapsed. And I'm looking at what the council is dealing with now, and it's a very different type of recession, because when the housing market collapsed, everything flattened out. This time, we've really got a tale of two cities. We've got the residential real estate market, which is doing really well. Amazon coming to the area, other things like that are putting a lot of positive upward pressure on home prices. People want to live in Alexandria. It's highly desirable, so they're paying more money to live here. On the flip side, our local restaurants, our local retailers, and our hotel market have just been decimated by COVID. And it puts a real challenge in the hands of the council as it tries to grapple with diminished revenues, services for those in need, because we have a lot of people in the community who are still very much in need, and a lack of revenues to pay for it all. I think the city council did a smart thing when they put the budget together. When they started this budget process in the fall, they asked the city manager to present basically 3 budgets. He presented a high budget where there was no change in the property tax rate. He presented a low budget where the average tax bill stays flat. And then he presented what was his recommended budget, which is somewhere right in the middle. That's a good process because it gives the council a lot to work with right now. They know that if they want to cut taxes further, they can go after the list of services that the city manager has given them. But it's a painful list, and Alexandria has shown over its history to not really like cuts to services. Things like police, fire, tree canopy, after-school programs, those are all things that are on the city manager's list if we want to go to a flat budget, flat tax rate increase for residential homeowners. On the flip side, if we want to not change the tax rate at all, there are services for the public that can be expanded. And I think the council is going to be in an interesting, have an interesting discussion about do they want to expand services or add a little bit of revenue to some services at a time when the economy is so challenged.
All right. Well, thank you for those opening thoughts, Rob. Bill, thanks for being with us today. And as a 30-plus-year resident of the City of Alexandria, you've been watching the city budget for years. And as you saw the city manager roll out his budget last week, tell us some of your initial thoughts and reactions, and how do you think this budget has been presented in relation to responding to the impacts of the COVID pandemic that's affecting worldwide and obviously many people right here in Alexandria?
Yeah, Frank, thanks for having me today, and it's good to be with Rob and Janet. And Janet, by the way, I was on the BFAC for 7 years, so I know how much hard work goes into that. But as I look at the budget, the way it's been presented, one of the things that always seems to concern me is when we lead with the narrative around the tax rate. The tax rate is only one part of the equation to get to the actual taxes that people pay. And these days, it's really the tax rate times your assessment divided by $100, plus your stormwater fee, and plus your refuse fee. So I tend to look at the budget that way. And while we're looking at a proposed 2-cent tax rate decrease, when you do the math, it really comes out for the average household to be almost a 6% tax increase in real dollars. And that's what really matters to residents, is how much more or how much less am I going to pay? And in the 32 years I've lived here, I've never seen tax dollars go down out of the pockets of taxpayers, even though the tax rate sometimes goes down. So I think that's a very important thing. In terms of COVID, I think the city has done, we really should start by saying that we have an enviable tax base. If we were Portsmouth, Virginia, or some of the other cities in Virginia, we'd probably be hit a lot harder. But we have the means to withstand it. We did it pretty well in 2020 and the first half of 2021. Frankly, we did some of the easy things that you do to reduce expenditures by freezing pay increases, freezing hiring, and deferring capital improvements to further years. The harder stuff, and Rob alluded to this, there are harder actions that are not so palatable. Fortunately, we haven't had to do that. And I think given the FY22 budget starts in July and runs through the following June in 2022, if the predictions about herd immunity and the vaccine and such, come to pass, I'm not sure in FY22 it's going to be. I think we may be surprised at how well we recover in 22, but we've already proven we can get through it with our tax base and also with the fund balance, which is our savings account or our rainy day fund being so robust.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill. Janet, with you being on BFAC for quite a few years here, the bond rating, they always talk about Alexandria has a very high bond rating. Tell us a little bit why Alexandria consistently always has a good bond rating, and your thoughts on where we should be in reference to a residential tax rate, and if you're sort of comfortable with what the city managers put together this year.
Yeah, so some of the things that they look at when they do the bond rating are, how well we are able to establish a rainy day fund, as was mentioned before. That's really critical, and the city has done an extremely good job of working through that. It's also how well do you manage your the revenue stream that's coming in? Do you have a fairly regular revenue stream? And I think we can say that from the city perspective. So we don't have a huge pension problem like some of the other cities do, where they have more pension and the pension isn't growing. The pension fund isn't growing to such a degree that they're not able to pay for pensions down the road. So overall, we have a good foundation from a ratings agency's perspective, and we typically get AAA. So that's a good thing. So some of the things that I think the city, one of the BFAC has been talking to quite a bit is the city look at how much revenue they get from residential property owners versus how much they get from commercial. And if you look at the numbers, we actually have been going down. So if you look at back in 2009, we used to get like 30.5% of our revenue from commercial versus 69.5. It is now in 2021, it is 21.3%. So that's about a 9% drop from commercial. And I think it's really important. We have a good situation here. We've got the innovation, the Virginia Tech Innovation Area coming in. We've got Amazon. We have the Patent Office and National Science Foundation. We've got Landmark. We've got all these hubs. We should really start looking to grow businesses that will come in and support those organizations, bringing in good jobs and also help us from a using commercial real estate. Now, I get that now that we've gone through the pandemic, maybe some companies may not want to have use commercial real estate as much as they did before. However, we're also hearing that a lot of them are saying we really do need some kind of a footprint, an office footprint that people can go into, because we need that for establishing teams, teamwork, all of those kinds of things that are important. So I don't think the commercial real estate is going to go away. And I think if we start it, we have AEDP, who actually does a tremendous job in working with businesses to try and bring them in. I think we should leverage that. You know, they did a study back in 2016 with Bright Line Strategies, where they looked at the city and how businesses view the city. And there are a number of things about that we probably need to revisit. 57% of the respondents had either a negative or a neutral view of the city. 60% had only interactions with the city once a year. 60% wanted more. They also almost wanted daily interactions. So, and we underperform in things like operating costs, startup, being business friendly. Some people think that maybe the city doesn't even want businesses. Now, I get that this was 2016. I think this study needs to be redone and start focusing on like tax structure to align with a growth strategy, development of commercial aid offices, I mentioned, so that we can start bringing businesses in, policy recommendations for ease of doing business with the city, and also some equity review on policies and procedures for small and minority businesses. I think if we went out and did that, I think there's probably some lessons learned there that could really make the city very attractive for businesses.
Great. Thank you, Janet. Rob, with your experience being in the state legislature and also being on the city council, we talk about the city's budget is the proposed $767 million this year, but not all of our money obviously comes from the city, it comes from the state. So if you could give us a little overview, Rob, of how you think the finances of the Commonwealth of Virginia were handled during your time on in the state legislature, and also how it is today, and maybe let the citizens know the importance of having a good Commonwealth be able to work with the City of Alexandria to create a good budget.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I'd also like to piggyback on the comments about commercial property in a second. But to talk about the state, Virginia's actually weathered the COVID recession pretty well. It's on its rebound right now, and it is that's showing up in the state revenues. They're going to fund the schools at a really robust level this year, which is great for Alexandria because we get some of our school funding from the state. We don't get as much as we should, but we get a good bit. And the state has been able to ride kind of the slow rebound of the recession to fill its coffers in a way that helps Alexandria and I think helps the state. So Virginia is managing itself really well. They're being careful about their forecasting, and when they get revenues beyond their forecasting, they're applying it to smart things like education and infrastructure and rainy day funds. Now, I want to go back to the conversation we had a second ago about the business climate in Alexandria and the long debate we've had about whether or not we should have a balance between residential revenues into the city and commercial revenues and business revenues into the city. And I would argue there are some fundamental shifts happening right now that make that a an old debate that we kind of need to do away with. The first piece is people are working from home now, and you're going to see a lot of businesses who aren't going to go back to the commercial office when COVID ends. We're going to have to recognize that that's going to change the commercial tax base, and it's going to change the desirability of commercial space. The second thing is small businesses in Alexandria are competing against Amazon.com and other large internet companies. Our retailers, our restaurants have some big international competition that they're dealing with. And that international competition pays a lot less taxes than the small mom and pop does. The small mom and pop has to pay its B-poll tax, which is just an across-the-board tax on the total revenue that it brings in every year. It's not on profits, it's just on revenue. So after a tough year like we've just had, small businesses like mine are writing checks to the government right now, but we're doing it in the hole, basically, because if you've been able to break even through COVID, you don't have a lot left over to pay the city, but you're paying on gross receipts. You're not paying on profit. Amazon doesn't have to pay those taxes. Amazon doesn't have to pay property taxes. Amazon only pays retail taxes, which is a benefit to the city, absolutely. But it means Amazon's paying essentially less taxes per transaction than a small restaurant or a small retailer in Alexandria is paying. And that puts your small mom and pops at a disadvantage. And I think we have to have a conversation about that as a city as to whether or not we want our small retail mom and pops to be at a disadvantage tax-wise vis-a-vis Amazon and other large international companies that don't have to pay the same taxes. It's a tough conversation, but I think it's one as we come out of this recession that we're going to have.
And Rob, with you owning your own business, I know we had talked a little before the meeting about how not only do you pay your property taxes in the building, you have taxes on your equipment and everything that's really kind of in your business. And I believe that the state sets a maximum tax rate that the local municipality can set on some of these things. And tell me some of your thoughts, or specifically on some of the things that are challenging to you as a businessman, as getting taxed on, and should we be going back to the city and saying, hey, can you consider lowering this tax?
Well, I think as part of this conversation about how we tax small businesses in the city compared to the large guys, I think you have to look at the property taxes we pay. I run a donut shop and cafe. If I buy a mixer for my donut shop, a mixer can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. I have to pay money every year on the value of that mixer. Amazon doesn't have to pay value on its property in Alexandria that it uses to fulfill orders to our customers. Other large national retailers don't have to pay property taxes to Alexandria on the infrastructure they need to fulfill orders to Alexandria. So it's another example of the way small businesses are essentially paying more money per transaction than the big guys are. And I think Alexandria has always been a city that loves its small businesses, and we love our retail shops. We like our main streets to be populated with interesting things. And there's a conversation to have as the economy improves about how we revitalize that small business space. There's a lot of empty storefronts right now, and we want to attract people into the city. And I think we're going to have a conversation about how we attract the small guys if that's what we want.
Right. Okay, good. All right, thank you, Rob. And all three of you, feel free to jump in if you want to have follow-up comments on any of the previous speakers or comments that be made. I want to have a good open dialogue here going. Bill, if I could ask you a question here. In Alexandria is a very transient community. 50% of the population here turns over every 6 years, and approximately 35 to 40% of the people that live here are homeowners, and the other folks are renters. And in your opening comments, Bill, you mentioned about the stormwater fee and different fees in trash fees and things like that. So, the homeowners do pay a big portion of the city budget. So if you could give us some thoughts on equity, I guess, is what they talk about a lot these days. If you could give us some of your thoughts about the budget and how a lot of the tax burden falls onto the homeowners, and exactly what this stormwater fee is. And I understand there's now a doubling of the stormwater fee that are affecting homeowners. If you could elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack there, Frank. But we have to start with our values in Alexandria. We have a very strong sense of community here, even though we do have a lot of people who move in and out, and a strong sense of taking care of our most vulnerable communities. It's very important to us. and we've done it gladly. In fact, I think Alexandria has been the leader in Northern Virginia the whole time I've lived in. I probably lived in Northern Virginia for almost 40 years, and I have to say we've been the leader at taking care of our most vulnerable. So that's not going to go away because we don't want it to. And I'm a homeowner, and like you say, there are probably 30 to 40,000 core homeowners in town who have set roots here, and they gladly pay their taxes, particularly for taking care of the most vulnerable. But I do think we also have to be responsible to those homeowners. They do so much, not just in paying their taxes, but they're also the people who give their time and give their money to charity and so on and so forth, and really make up a big part of the fabric of the community. So the big question is, have we been responsible to them in taking care of them? And I think largely we have, but the rate of increase of the taxes paid by homeowners, this is condos and townhouses as well, single family homes, has averaged about 4.5% over the last decade. And that was before this year, where it's going to go up 6%. And that's running 3 to 4 times the rate of inflation. And the question is, how long is that sustainable? And the other concern I have, quite frankly, is the capital improvement budget, which has tripled over the past 10 years. And in fact, if you go back to when when he was a councilman, Rob was on city council in his first or second year, we were looking at very small capital improvement budgets, on the order of, for 5 years, on the order of a few hundred $100 million. Now we're looking at a 10-year capital improvement budget that has tripled from about 900 and some million 10 years ago to almost 2.7 million has been proposed this year. And, this is the ticking time bomb potentially in the city, that all of these things have been kicked down, kicking the can down the road on the sewer system, kicking the can down the road on schools, kicking the can down the road on stormwater infrastructure. These are all going to come back to roost. On top of that, we've got the metro station that we're building at Potomac Yard. So it's a huge, huge amount of money that taxpayers are going to be saddled with over the next decade. As it relates to stormwater, I wrote a letter to the editor recently and to the Alexandria Times on this topic, that we obviously have had terrible flooding in Del Rey and in Rosemont and in other parts of the city towards Holmes Run and Van Dorn area. And it's just been awful, where people had their basement flooded out 3 times. I heard a story of someone who, not only that, but lost their homeowner's insurance. And right after that, everybody in the house got COVID. And it was just one thing after another. And to some extent, we should look at, to what degree is the city responsible for what's happened down there along 2 dimensions. One is, have we really been clearing out the pipes, which is what we should have been doing with the new stormwater fee that was implemented in, I think, fiscal year 2018. And I'm not sure we had. And then second, are we doing the appropriate planning for improving that infrastructure and maybe expanding that infrastructure based on the Casca study in 2016? I think we failed along both of those dimensions. And the city's response this year, under extreme duress, not looking good about what had happened, was to double the stormwater fee. And I was thinking, how is the answer an exact 100% increase of a fee that was just implemented a few years ago for this very purpose? So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Bill. Janet, in reference to the capital improvement project budget, the city manager laid it out the other night, and it's about $2.7 billion over the next 10 years. Tell me, does the BFAC committee have a lot of input on what projects you're going to move forward with? Stormwater, I understand there's a mental health building that's being discussed, new schools. We need to renovate City Hall, Market Square, parking garage. The stormwater issue I seems to be one of the biggest ones that's really impacting homeowners. So if you could give us a little thought on the way BFAC handles the CIP.
Yeah, so we really haven't weighed in on, as far as me being on BFAC, I have not seen us weigh in on it. The area that I can tell you that we have weighed in on is the mayor came out earlier last year and said, could you take a look at the quarterly project management report that we get? Because it didn't seem to be have information that would give you an understanding of where projects were, what they, how they look compared to when they were first approved, that kind of thing. And the city council was finding that sometimes they were surprised when projects got behind schedule or over cost and that kind of thing. And so they had us take a look at their project management capabilities, which really does play right into the CIP program, because those are really projects and need good, solid project management. And the good news on this is that the city set up something called the Department of Project Implementation, DPI. And their effort is to standardize project management across the city in all the projects. This is absolutely critical, and they've established it. They're establishing this based on the Program Management Institute, which is kind of like kind of like a CPA organization for project management. You literally have to take a exam to show that you are a project management certified. I've actually taken it myself, and it's like one of the hardest tests I've ever taken. But what it does is it allows you to then have standards in place to be able to establish projects, to be able to manage them through implementation, and to monitor them as well. And you have a process by which leadership within wherever it is, within a company, within, in this case, it would be the city, takes a look at those and can know from project to project how well projects are doing, and know that they're all being compared on an apples to apples basis. Because right now that's not necessarily the case. And so a number of the things that we recommended from BFAC is that it's absolutely critical when this organization stands up and has these standards in place, that all project managers use it, and that the leadership actually looks at quarterly, monthly, whatever reports they decide to come out with, and asks questions and supports the project managers and the implementation of those standards. Because if leadership doesn't do it, then project managers may not follow the guidelines that they need to follow. But what this does, once they establish it, is it gives them a chance to be able to look at projects and see how well they're doing, and know early on if things are starting to run into problems. You can start measuring your risk factors. You can start measuring how it looks compared to the initial budget, how it looks based on the current, the schedule that it was established. And so my sense is that the city is supportive of this and really wants this to be successful. Right. So I think they're doing the right thing in establishing something like that.
Gotcha. And Janet, you've been in budgeting your whole career. How do you just feel personally? I know you have impact with being on the BFAC committee on the city budget, but do you think we have a good process here in the city of putting together a city budget? Are you happy with it? Have you made a lot of different suggestions to the city on how they can make improvements? Or what's your overall feel of the way things are handled here in the city as we do budgeting every year?
Yeah, I think they do a really good job. One of the things that they focused on is the priority-based budgeting, which gives all the departments within the city a chance to be able to look at the overall budget, not just their own budgets, but others, and make determinations as to what the priorities should be. I think that's the right approach to it, because you have to make sure that everyone is looking at this from a holistic perspective. And so first, I think that's really good. Now, there are a couple things that I think the city probably needs to be careful of. And you run into this wherever you are. I mean, when I was in DOD as a CFO at one of the defense agencies, it's easy to go to across the board cuts. They're little, they don't seem like they're that much. But then all of a sudden you start realizing that they have a huge impact overall down the road. And so one of the things that BFAC looked at was there's a 10-year program that the city does that looks at revenue and looks at also how organizations within the city are funded. And a couple things that they found when they looked at some of the across-the-board cuts, they found that some of the areas like the accountability, efficiency, and managed government from 2009 to 2018 went down 16.6%. Health and thriving residents went down 23.6%. Living green and prospering city went down 9.5%. Those can have a substantial impact on the services, but you don't necessarily realize it because you're making small little cuts one year after the other. But it ends up adding up. And so one of the things that BFAC has said is be careful with across-the-board cuts because it can really have an impact that you don't even understand until it's too late.
Rob, I'd like to ask you a question. You've had your two daughters go through the city schools here in Alexandria, and the schools are always a major part of the city's budget. I believe this year it's approximately $300 million are going to our city schools. There's also been another piece of the General Assembly has put forward that local municipalities can have the idea if they want to have their employees participate in collective bargaining. As you know, the schools have been closed right now, and I'm just thinking, what's your thought? Is collective bargaining a good idea for Alexandria? You know, traditionally our employees are treated very well, and this gives them an option to, negotiate salaries a little bit more. Do you think that's something that the city council should allow here in the city of Alexandria? And also, your thoughts on the schools, and do you think we fund the schools a little bit more than we should, and should the city council maybe ask the schools to tighten up a little bit? So I'll leave that up to you any way you want to go with it.
Okay. And then I might touch on some of the capital conversation we just had too. I think you said it right, Frank. We treat our employees really well in Alexandria. And I personally don't think collective bargaining is going to change that. I think it'll only make it better. It just gives us another avenue to talk to employees, to work with them on their salary and their benefits and their other workplace needs. And I think in a city like Alexandria that cares about its employees as well as we do, I think collective bargaining is just another tool to help us care about our employees and keep the great high quality staff that we have. I mean, we're very fortunate in Alexandria that we have such high quality staff in our city and our schools. I personally don't think collective bargaining that. I don't think it hurts our budget. I think it, if anything, helps us attract good people. That said, I think school spending is one of the areas of growth in our capital budget. It's one of the areas of growth in our operating budget. We've seen a huge need for more school space because of the influx in students into our schools. More people are buying homes in the middle of the city in our existing housing stock, and they're having kids. And they want places, they want to send their kids to our public schools, which is a great problem to have. But it's caused our capital budget to increase quite a bit as we've spent money on new school space, and it certainly affected our operating budget as well. I know we spend less per pupil than Arlington does, and I think Arlington is a good benchmark for per pupil spending. I wouldn't want to be above Arlington, but if we're staying a little bit under Arlington, I think we're competitive with the region with our per pupil funding. So I think we're kind of in line with where other competitive jurisdictions are. On the larger picture with the budget and taxes, Alexandria is an incredibly transparent city when it comes to how we do our budget. We have always given the public lots of opportunities to provide feedback. The council asks for that feedback and really goes out of its way to request it from the community. And I think that feedback over the years has been, let's take care of our citizens, let's take care of our schools, let's take care of our infrastructure. The downside is we had a number of decades where we hadn't been investing in our infrastructure the way we should. And as Bill said, you can't, you've got to pay for it at some point. And this stuff comes back and haunts you if you don't do it. And I think what the current council has been trying to do is actually play catch up with our stormwater, play catch up with our school capacity, and also make some really strategic capital investments like Potomac Yard and ultimately in Landmark Mall, which will make the tax base grow. Those are all pretty well thought out, pretty carefully planned things. I think the city is responding to global warming and trying to address flood mitigation. That's causing a fairly substantial increase in our stormwater fees this year. But I'm glad they're biting the bullet personally, because it's a bullet that has been sitting there to be bitten for a long time. And we keep pushing it down the road because there's always another day to do infrastructure investments. And quite frankly, sewers aren't the most popular place to spend money until someone's got flooding in their basement. Now I think there's a critical mass of citizens that see that we need to spend money on our stormwater infrastructure, and they want to see us do it in a big way so that we can really solve these problems instead of piecemealing it. So I applaud the city for biting the bullet on that one. It's a hard one. There's never a good time to do it from a money out of your pocket standpoint, but boy, it's better to get it done than to pay the consequences of not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you, Rob. Bill, going to you about, you've mentioned about the tax rate on residential properties a little bit. There's the good side and the bad side of this. I've spent my whole career in housing, and this was the numbers that came out the other day. The average non-condo home in Alexandria in 1995, whether it was a townhouse or single-family home, was worth $260,000 in 1995. Today, that number is $840,000. So, the tax rate has always remained about 1% of the value of the house, give or take. But obviously, the home values have pretty much tripled over that time. So the average homeowner now is probably paying about $9,500 a year, $9,300 a year in a tax bill. So, Bill, what's the answer? Do you see any way to control this, or are we going to? This creates affordable housing challenges here in Alexandria because a lot of people just can't really get in here and buy properties. So, go ahead, Bill. I'll leave that for you.
Yeah, it's a tough problem. We talked earlier about vulnerable communities, but I have a big fear. I actually don't have as much of a fear about them because we're going to take care of them. But what I have a fear about are middle class people. We've taxed out so many middle class folks from the city already, people who, can afford to pay a decent amount of mortgage or rent. But they just find it more affordable to leave. And they're part of the fabric of the community, big part of the fabric of the community. And we've seen whole neighborhoods kind of turn over from middle class neighborhoods, diverse middle class neighborhoods, to gentrified neighborhoods where now, houses on very small lots are $1.5 million, which is absolutely crazy. We have a lot of seniors whose biggest asset is their home and are on fixed incomes, and so I worry about those folks. One of the biggest bills in their budget is their city real estate tax bill, and that's just getting harder and harder to afford. And then we have a lot of people who've been here multi-generationally. Their parents were here, their grandparents were here, their great grandparents were here, and they've inherited their homes. And these are often middle class people. We have a neighborhood in where I live in Seminary Hill, called the Woods Avenue neighborhood, which is a historically African-American community and was built, when their forebears lost their land to eminent domain for the building of the original T.C. Williams High School. And a lot of those people have inherited those homes. And, we're taxing them out. And my understanding is some of them have decided to sell and get out of town. So we're losing some of our historical families. And they're not poor people, people in poverty, whom we focus on a lot, and I think we need to continue to do so. Okay. But we also have to, worry about in 2030, are we just going to have two types of people in the city: wealthy people and people in poverty.
All right. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. But we have a few questions rolling in. We have about 13 or 14 minutes left in the program here. Before I get to the questions, Janet, one other thing that I understand out there with one of the federal relief bills, the city's expected to bring in maybe $25 to $35 million. How do you have an idea on how the city might direct that money toward our budget, or what we might do with it to help offset some of the other costs we have in the city?
Yeah, so some of the things that they're going to use the money for is food insecurity, so food distribution through some things like Alive and other things. They're also going to have eviction prevention and rental assistance, economic security. That means childcare access, also community recovery, which is assisting nonprofits with meeting the needs of their clients, economic recovery for targeting financial support for businesses, and then supporting the city in response to the pandemic. And they've got two different views. Either if they get 34 million, they'll divide it a little bit higher among those categories, or 26 million. So they do have a good plan, and they've actually done a very good job of what they've received. They've been able to spend it, which is really good. Some of the things that the city has done in response to the pandemic has really been terrific. The fact that they were so able to so quickly make some changes to policies and procedures to help business, to help some of the restaurants, I think has been terrific. I think that, and actually, when you look at restaurants, they initially took a big hit back in the April timeframe when everything shut down, but actually it's come back pretty well. Initially they had $20.5 million in revenue, assuming they would get for this year. It's now up to 17.4 that they project. So they've done a really good job in doing some things, changing policies and procedures. And AEDP has been very supportive of businesses and trying to help them go online and really shorten or make smaller the gap between those who are digitally capable versus the businesses that are not. So I must commend the city that it's been for the kind of challenges that they've had to deal with. I think they've done a pretty good job. The interesting thing is that, for instance, local sales tax was the highest it's ever been in December. I mean, that's just amazing. Business licenses are up compared to what they thought they were going to bring in from a budget perspective to what they now actually project. Lodging is way down. In lodging and restaurants, they don't think that either one of those are really going to recover until 2023 or 24 because of the impacts.
Right. We have a few questions that have rolled in here, and a lot of them, actually, I'm going to kind of read these three questions all together. And Rob, you might be the leader owning small businesses here in Alexandria to try to take the first shot at these. But one of the questions is, what's currently happening with the rental levels in the commercial real estate market? If it were legal, would businesses be willing to pay a higher minimum wage of maybe $15 an hour in return for a tax rebate? And another question we have in reference to small businesses, how can the tax burden for small businesses, how can we lighten it without shifting it to the residents? So kind of three questions in one there, Rob. Feel free to address it any way you'd like.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let me hit the minimum wage one first. I already pay, my employees make over $15 an hour already. So that's already covered for my business. I think incentives for things like that are a useful tool, but the truth is the market is competitive for good employees, and employers who are taking care of their employees probably should be paying in that range right now already or close to it. And hopefully they'll get there soon. I think, as Janet mentioned, the retail sales tax were way up in the later part of last year. The truth of that is a lot of that is Amazon and online retailers who are doing incredibly well right now. And a lot of our small local retailers are still struggling. And I think we see that tale of two cities again, where the local mom and pops are having to bear a burden, and a tax burden as well as kind of a market burden that the large guys don't have to, because let's be honest, people are home, there's COVID going on, people are ordering things to be delivered, and that is taking revenue away from the small guys. And then on top of it, the small guys pay more taxes per transaction. I think to go back to my earlier comments about small businesses paying more than the big businesses do when it comes to taxes, I think there needs to be a full look at that issue. And I think one way potentially to shift things around would be to look at how we calculate or what we charge for retail sales taxes. Amazon pays retail sales taxes. So if the retail sales tax rate was slightly more, Amazon would be paying for some of that. It's not a perfect solution, so I don't put that out there as a kind of an end all be all answer, but there's got to be a way to bring some equity between what Amazon pays and what our local bookstore pays, for example. As it relates to let's see, I make sure I got your last three questions now.
Yeah.
We talked about minimum wage. We talked about the tax equity, and what was
the commercial real estate market and the vacant
commercial real estate market.
Yeah.
So when I talk to people in the commercial real estate market, there's not been as much of a softening as I expected there would be, to be honest. A lot of good commercial operators have given their tenants some reductions or some special benefits to stay in their place to get through COVID. Not everyone has, but a lot of people have. But when it comes to renting out space, you're not seeing a big softening in the per square footage prices that people are paying. There's a little bit of a softening, but it's not anywhere near what COVID would have predicted 9 months ago. And I think what that says is there's still demand for retail spaces, and it's going to be the job of the city now to try to attract with ADP and our small business groups some really smart, clever retailers and restaurants to those retail spaces so that we can get the vibrancy we need. And I would just finish by saying Alexandria's Economic Development Partnership, our Small Business Development Center, and the city council have actually been phenomenal when it comes to their responsiveness during COVID. I can't emphasize that enough. They have been flexible. They've been creative. They have moved quickly. They have done things that other local governments never could have done as fast and as nimbly. And they really deserve a lot of praise for it, because I know for my small business, it probably wouldn't be in business if it weren't for the city's flexibility and creativity over the last 12 months. And I think a lot of other small businesses feel the same way. And we're all very appreciative of how much the city has done to keep us afloat.
Gotcha. Good. Thank you, Rob. Well, we're down to our last 5 minutes here, so I'd like to get some final closing thoughts and comments from the three of you of anything you didn't address earlier. So why don't we, I have one more question. I'll read it out here. Janet, we'll start with you, and then you can maybe answer this and then make some closing statements, and we'll move to Bill and then to Rob. But Janet, the affordable housing is always a big issue here in Alexandria. And what have you done through the city budget to make housing more affordable to local police, fire, healthcare workers, and other essential workers in Alexandria, if you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and in fact, it was touched on briefly earlier. So let me just throw out some statistics that I think will really help with this. So BFAC actually wrote a affordable housing memo about some of the things that the city could do. So between 2000 and 2017, affordable housing units went down by 90%. Between that same time period, the median income in our area increased by 42%, but rent for either a studio apartment or a one-bedroom apartment went up anywhere from 94 to 102%. In about over 15,000 homes that make $75,000 or more spend 30% of their income on housing. 69% of those that make up to 50,000 pay 50%. And then when you look in city employees, and that gets one of the points that Bill made, is that only 11% of the employees live in the city. And it costs you have to have an income of about $68,000 to be able to rent a one-bedroom apartment, and $84,000 for a two-bedroom apartment. Well, that's higher than a teacher, a firefighter, administrative assistant makes. So it goes back to this: what kind of a city do we want to have if the people who support us can't even afford to live here?
Gotcha. Okay, good. Very good insight. Thanks for all those wonderful, wonderful numbers. Bill, we got a couple minutes left here. Any final thoughts before we wrap up the program?
Yeah, I thought it was 19% on of city employees live here, but so I'm interested to find out if it's gone to 11. But my final comments are this: I actually don't think the city has done a great job over the last 10 years managing the budget and managing its finances. For a few reasons. One, taxes are increasing at 3 times the rate of inflation. The fund balance, which is the rainy day fund, has been doubled over the last 5 years. And that's tax money that's just going into a savings account. It should be in the savings accounts or for disposable income for the people who are paying taxes. And the CIP has tripled over the last 10 years. I still think that's the ticking time bomb. And frankly, when we come to something like the stormwater fee, I see a pattern of governing without analysis. A 100% increase, what is that based on? It's not based on anything except increasing the capacity and using a number that would seem like it's going to have a tremendous amount of impact for a couple of neighborhoods. And I think those neighborhoods need the help. It's absolutely negligent what happened to them with stormwater. And with the flooding, and it should have been taken care of through proper maintenance of the stormwater system, which had not been done. So, I got to tell you, though, I think our city employees do a great job. And I think one of the biggest priorities we should have with our city budget going forward is making sure we keep our salaries very competitive so we can continue to attract and retain great talent.
Right. All right. Thank you, Bill. And Rob, we'll turn it over to you, our former elected official here, to give some closing words, and then I'll be glad to wrap up the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would start by saying I think Bill and I have just a different view of the way the city has run things over the last 10 years. And, I certainly remember the years where Bill was advocating for money for sports fields, for things like lights at T.C. Williams High School, things that cost the city money and forced us to add spending to our budget, but were good things for the community. And I think Bill at the time was on the right side of those issues because they really enhanced the quality of life of the city. Our school capacity is growing, and we've certainly had to spend money on that. The rainy day fund, for a long time, we didn't maintain enough of a rainy day fund to manage our capital and our cash properly and to give us the kind of cushion we needed in case there were an emergency. The council has, I think, very conservatively built up a rainy day fund with BFAC's encouragement to make sure we've got the reserves in place in case there is an emergency that we have to respond to. As it relates to the overall city budget, I would just leave citizens with this. On March 8th, we're going to have the budget public hearing. Every citizen in Alexandria can comment on the budget. It's an open public process. We have one of the most transparent budgets in the country. We win awards for our transparency. It is something that Alexandria takes really seriously, is transparency. We don't hide the budget and only let the folks we agree with listen to it. We don't hide our budget and just let the people that we invite in to see it. We make it available to everybody. And I think that transparency of a budget is something that we can be really proud of, and it gives every citizen a chance to participate. And we'll see what the council does. They have some hard choices ahead of them. I think we have a good council, and I think that they will be good stewards as they manage all of these complicated issues.
All right, great. Well, Rob, thanks for those closing thoughts. And I want to thank all three of you, Janet, Bill, and Rob, for a great program today. You have tremendous amount of insight, and I think the citizens that were watching the program today really got a lot out of it. So I want to thank everybody for watching Agenda Alexandria. Next month, we're going to have a great program on North Old Town. And then in April, we're going to talk about the density issues here in the city of Alexandria. But for today, we'll be glad to wrap up the program. Thank all of you for being here, and email your city council members and participate in the budget. And as Rob said, March 8th, you can have your word in front of the city council. So thank all of you, and have a great day.